Well, I guess none of that went, did it? Sorry about that. Good evening and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority. It's our Board of Directors meeting. It's Thursday, November 21st. We do have a quorum present. We will have two board members joining us online, and while they are able to participate with us, they will not be able to vote. First on our agenda is to approve the agenda, and I just have one little change. Emergent items list under details Carpenter, it should read Mozak. And with that change, would someone like to make a motion to approve the agenda? Simi makes the motion, and Julie is making the second. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you so much. That passed unanimously. Next online is our public comment. Deb, do we have anybody online before that?
We do, but no one has raised their hand.
Okay, and there's no one in the gallery, so thank you so much, everyone. We'll move on to general announcements. For general announcements, I have a few. The first is the Audit Procurement Task Force completed their task, and we've hired Plant Moran. They were awarded the contract, and I want to thank Mike Alamang and Chris Allen for their work on that, which leads to the fact that the Audit Task Force has been formed, and they met yesterday with staff and Plant Moran to begin the board involvement process. And I just want to say thank you to Kyra Sims, Jesse Miller, and Chris Allen for being on that task force. Lastly, you may have gotten an email with regards to Policy Governance Boot Camp that will be held in Ann Arbor next spring. So I really encourage those of you who have not had the opportunity to attend boot camp to be able to do that. But also, if you want a refresher, if you want to learn more, you are also welcome to attend. And that is all of my communications. Does anyone have any other communications?
I had a question.
Yes, Rich.
With that policy boot camp, is that just for the ride, or is that going to be other?
It's actually going to be she's going to bring her boot camp from Grand Rapids to Ann Arbor, so it will be open to other boards, which is actually quite exciting because we will not just see ourselves, we will get input from other people and see how they learn and how they grow and how they use policy governance. So that's a good question. Any other comments or questions or communications? Wonderful. Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move right on to the consent agenda. There is only one change to the consent agenda, the board meeting minutes from September 19th meeting. They don't reflect the fact that Mr. Simi Barr seconded the public hearing motion that was given by Mr. Rich Chang. That is, Deb Holt, the administrative assistant, is aware, and she will make the changes online, but I wanted to make everyone else aware that that was there. And if someone would like to enter the consent agenda with a motion with that change to the meeting minute notes. Susan makes the motion and seconded by Mr. Simi Barr. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you so much. That passed unanimously. Now we're on to the Ownership Linkage Task Force, and that's Mr. Rich Chang.
Hello, everyone. So just a small update, but with great outcomes. Jeff and Matt were actually able to lock down the mayor of Ann Arbor, the mayor of City Ypsi, and the Ypsi Township supervisor to meet with us and hopefully establish some kind of regular cadence meeting with them. We're aiming for at least quarterly meetings. So Jeff is actually working on scheduling those meetings, and actually they were even expanding. The mayors and the supervisor were actually willing to expand the audience on their end, so we may at least have city managers and even some of their other officers at these meetings. So like I said, Jeff's working on scheduling those meetings. We're also going to work on a content calendar for each of the different meetings that we hope that we have with them. And then we expect the first meeting overall to be more introductory and then get the process moving, then focus on interests and values at that time. But that's why we want to build out that content calendar. And then we are also working on who is going to represent the ride at those various meetings, because we just want to make sure that's fairly represented. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Rich. Does anyone have? Mic problems tonight. Thank you, Rich. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Chang? Seeing none, I just want to let us know we were hoping to have our board members present on the monitors. Oh, their camera is off? Okay, so we're going to rely on Deb to, when our board members have feedback or need to raise their hand, we're going to rely on Deb to give us that information. Thank you, Deb. So next on the agenda is the treatment of the traveling public, and Mr. Carpenter, would you like to tee us off?
I don't know if I want to tee you off, but I will get you started.
Oh, I was thinking golf, not the other.
Yeah,
but
they're
okay,
fair.
enough.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair. The treatment of the traveling public monitoring report begins on page 28. You will see in the meeting minutes that I believe it was this is one I think it was held over from October. And I believe the service committee reviewed it at that time and recommended, I think it was an A level of compliance. You will see we are reporting full compliance, green down the page on page 30. The board members survey on page 43, I believe, is also 100% green up and down the board. There were some comments on page 46 regarding some policy text. Happy to discuss that or be of aid to you in your discussion. And I did make a CEO note on page 41. There is a slight redundancy on one of the policies that might be addressed quickly. It seems more of an editorial thing. And it was noted in the board comments as well. With that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
So as a reminder, right now, we're going to discuss the policy as it was written in the monitoring report as it's received. We will have an opportunity under policy development to discuss this policy in terms of how we want to move forward. So I'm going to make a note of this policy so that it's on the agenda. Given that, does anybody have any questions or comments for the CEO now? And the service committee did recommend A. Thank you so much for your recommendation. If that is right with the board, would someone like to make a motion to accept the report as A? That would be by Mr. Rich Chang, and seconded by? That would be Mr. Mike Alamang. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll take the vote. All those in favor, raise your hands, please. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Next on the agenda is the treatment of staff, and again, that falls to you, Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you. We're catching up quickly. This is on page 48 of your packet. Well, it's also reviewed by the service committee, who is recommending a level of compliance of B. You will see on page 49, we are mostly green with one red, leading to the entire policy being partially compliant. The policy that's red is 223. This has to do with the implementation of the whistleblower policy. You may recall several months ago, our manager of human resources at the time came to sort of walk you through how that was going to be implemented. We then had a bit of a delay because she had another opportunity professionally, and we had to get a new manager of human resources, and they were really important to the rollout of that one. So it was delayed. We reported that in this monitoring report under this policy. We gave a deadline in here of having the policy compliant and the whistleblower procedure up and running by the end of January next year. There was a board comment about, could anything be done to be getting that sooner? I'm happy to let you know that yes, we were able to do that. We're going to be going live with the whistleblower policy at the beginning of December, just after the Thanksgiving break. So thank you, everyone, for your patience on that. So that will be coming into compliance very shortly, within a month. So if this policy had been reported a month later, I would have had a full green, but fair enough. There is a CEO note and board member comment regarding policy 2211. This pertains to some of the difficulty in interpreting and measuring words like humanity, creativity, knowledgeable contribution in policy 2211. Those comments, I believe, are on page 61 and 65. So happy to provide any assistance to you in those discussions if we can be. Other than that, Madam Chair, that concludes the monitoring report.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments for the CEO? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion to accept the report as the Service Committee recommended B, that 2.2.3 will be coming into compliance at the next round of monitoring? Would someone, do you all find that acceptable? And if you do, would someone like to make a motion to have it as B with the CEO stated non-compliance of 2.2.3? That would be Mr. Simi Bar and Mr. Rich Chang. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor, raise your hands, please. And that also passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We're just like zipping along here. Fantastic. Next on the agenda is the emergency CEO succession, and that's Miss Kamau.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the emergency CEO succession monitoring report starts on page 68. For the survey results on page 73, we hit 100% on finding the interpretation reasonable and the evidence verifiable. I do not have anything else to add.
The Governance Committee had an opportunity to review this policy, and we are recommending A, if that is acceptable to the board, and if it is, would someone like to make a motion? That would be Mr. Alamang, followed, seconded by Ms. Susan Palais. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, we will vote. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously also. Thank you. And one more bit of policy. We have construction 210, and that's Ms. Kamau again.
So for the construction monitoring report, that begins on page 75. And apart from the NEPA studies and the schematic design of the YTC, as well as the planning and design of the BTC, which is on policy 2.10.1, there were no other qualifying construction activities. Based on the board survey results on page 92 to 95, we had 100% on the interpretations being reasonable and the evidence being verifiable. And that's it for the monitoring report.
Thank you so much. The Service Committee recommended A after their review. If the board is amenable, would someone like to make a motion to receive the report as A? Oh, sorry. Hello, we'll take it from Julie will be first, and Rich will have seconded it. Is there any discussion on the motion as it was presented? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hands. And that also passed unanimously. Thank you so much. So now we have the joyous occasion of being able to go backwards and review policy 2.1, where we had all those excellent comments. They can be found in your packet. One moment. And that is page 46. And would someone like to begin the discussion? This is the policy that is treatment of the traveling public. Yes, Rich.
Sure, I'll start. So with 2.1.3, I was wondering if there's a way that we can, I guess, word the policy so that we could get some statistics or some data around that. Because as is, like I said, I thought it was a reasonable interpretation, but I don't know if just training enforcement is comprehensive enough. Like, can we actually see like, hey, there's been actually 0 incidents, or if there's some kind of benchmark? Because no matter how much I think the bus drivers and whoever do their job, there is going to be accidents. And for me, it's more just like, are we below some kind of industry standard or benchmark for number of incidences, whether it's pedestrians, cars, or vehicles, I guess, beyond just we have training and enforcement.
You bring up a good point. Does anyone want to discuss that further? Is the board interested in moving that forward at all, or is it going to die here on the floor? Rich, I think it looks like that discussion has ended, but it was a really good point. I think it's a metric, so I understand where you're coming from, but the report also, in terms of policy governance, we don't want to get too bogged down with metrics and things like that. Otherwise, we'd be looking at deliverables versus some of the other things. So maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
I mean, I find that's I would maybe find interesting because, I mean, we have, if you look at, say, like 2.1.2.1, there's a whole table of evidence that has like hard numbers in there. And we do see that with a lot of our other monitoring reports where they actually do give us numbers around like, our on-time performance. And so that's actually why I brought that up, because I thought this one, the whole thing around safety is pretty important, especially in this particular community, especially around pedestrians. And I think it'd be useful if we actually could point, especially if it ever came up in a community forum of, well, I really kind of wonder, especially around bicycle and pedestrians, safety, that we say like, well, look at the AAATA's record. We haven't had any incidences where there was a bus collision with a pedestrian. And that could actually potentially maybe be more utilized as a way to promote why public transportation is a really great option in a community that's really trying to get rid of more of like single-use private car use in the streets. So, but yeah, I mean, I understand. That's the only reason why I brought that up.
Julie, did you want to?
Yeah, I'm wondering, does the city collect other information about, pedestrian crashes? Is it getting measured somewhere else? Right, so like crashes with cyclists or APD or is someone doing this? Would it be redundant for us to do it? Or would it be easily accessible for us to get it? Or maybe related questions?
If I might.
Oh, please, Mr. Carpenter.
The data is available, both from us and from other sources. I think the insight that Mr. Chang is bringing is that the subject of this policy is the standards, not the actual safety. And so the interpretation is written about our internal training processes, not the actual result on the street. So if the board wanted to change the subject of the policy to be more about the actual results as opposed to our training exercises, we could certainly create data or find or collect and utilize the data. The data is available.
I'm wondering, based on this, yes, Mike?
I think Rich makes some very good points there. I think this data would be good information for the board to know, and in particular, as Rich emphasized, for the public to know. We want people to get out of their cars, and we want to have safety on our streets, which certainly includes pedestrians. And I think that would be good data. I mean, we see a lot of things online about cars hitting pedestrians. I presume we have a lot better statistics, and we would look good about that. But I think we deserve, and the public deserves to know that. And I certainly appreciate Mr. Carpenter's point that the specific policy really doesn't address that. And I think it would be good for maybe the next time around that it does.
Which one? Jesse's online. He'd like to make a comment, please.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies that I can't be there today. So we recently added a new end saying that the Stafford that we want the public transportation options to be perceived as safe. We've yet to receive a monitoring or to receive a report on that, and I wonder if that end is actually we're kind of getting at, because the way I'm understanding it is that the concern is that the need to be enforceable standards, but it's not whether or not those standards are being met, which is what the board is interested in. Um, I think that might be, I think that's a very valid question. It's something that obviously is very much at the top of mind right now, but I am wondering whether maybe our new end might address that. So I guess that's actually a question for you, for Rich to, if that's something, if that is that kind of what you're thinking of?
No, that's a good point, Jesse. Go ahead, Rich, and then Matt.
Actually, I'm glad you asked that because as I was listening to the comments, I was like, wait a second, maybe this is covered somewhere else. So yeah, I would definitely love to.
The factual data about how many collisions there are, how many injuries there are, not involving our staff, but in members of the traveling public. We do not report that to you right now because you haven't asked for it in the monitoring. The closest we come is this one, and I've always been a little unsure why you wanted to know about our standards rather than the actual results, but that's kind of been this way for a while. The upcoming ends, it's good that Mr. Miller mentioned it. Ms. Kamau and I are debating it right now and writing up your first interpretation of it for you in the ends report next month. That one revolves around, you may recall the wording, riders and prospective riders perceive the transit services as safe. So that one is about a subjective, intangible perception. As a result, the emerging interpretation really focuses on issues about passengers' experience with things like harassment, crime, general feelings of public or personal safety and security. It doesn't, at this time, address questions of what I would characterize as operational safety, slip-fall accidents, collisions, things of that nature.
Mr. Chang, what were you so given the new information that Matt has shared with us, Rich, did you see it as being all encompassing, only having to deal with the traveling public? Do you want to hear metrics on safety within, between, in drivers and things like that, the things that Matt just mentioned?
I mean, for me, I would be more interested in just the traveling public, how we're interacting and I mean, I'm always a big fan of the more data, the better, but I also know it takes a lot of time and sometimes takes the eye off the ball of what we're trying to accomplish. If there's some kind of, at least some, we can start small, right? If we can just get some metrics around the number of incidents that have occurred with pedestrians, cyclists, I think that would be a good start. And maybe it could be a sub-policy of 2.1.3, because I think we can't expect there to be like a very low number of incidences if we don't have some enforceable standards and procedures. And I would say that from that, then we can actually measure how effective are those policies and standards being. Because if we see a very high number of incidences, then maybe we need to, or the staff would need to revisit those policies at that time.
Mike?
Yeah, I think I'm going to make Rich's point with a few different words. I mean, the policy is written is about standards. And what's the purpose of having these standards is to protect the public. And so we've got to go, really the bottom line is we want to protect the public. And I mean, if we could magically do it without standards, that would be great. But standards are important, but the real objective is protecting the public, and I think that should be reflected somewhere. And it seems like this is a good place to do it with some slightly different words.
Yes, Julie?
I have no idea where it is, but I do recall that we have some sort of metric that we measure against for accidents in general. Correct? So I'm guessing there's maybe a similar something for accidents with pedestrians and or cyclists.
I do think there may be something in the quarterly service report
Okay,
about
that's
collisions.
right, yeah. I
And
had no idea where it was.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at Rosa Maria if I'm missing something.
Go ahead.
We have preventable accidents for per every 100,000 passengers in the quarterly service reports, and part of the customer service index that we have in the ends report includes the preventable accidents for each 100,000 passengers.
Yes, Jesse's on the line again.
Thank you. I think so. This all makes sense. Like, we're always allowed to ask for any data or information that the agency has, but I think especially in the service report, like these are not monitoring activities, which makes me think that we should take a closer look at the policy and because I think Rich, you have identified something that maybe isn't adequately covered. So that perhaps a policy that's going towards the unacceptable outcome of a certain too many accidents and injuries is warranted. I would be open to bringing this back to service committee for further discussion.
Does the board as a whole concur with what's been discussed tonight, and to have the service committee review this particular policy and see if there's anything else that might need to be addressed and bring it back to the full board? All right, let's go ahead and do that. I think there is some value there. Thank you, Jesse, for volunteering the service committee. Oh, was there anything else under this policy that someone wanted to discuss, or are we ready to move to the next policy? Jesse, are you raising your hand, or I can't quite tell?
Yeah. Well, there was the redundancy between what was it, 212 and 2131. The 212 says that operate without providing effective, comprehensible, accessible, and timely information. And then 2131 says allow public and riders to be without accessible, understandable information with respect to services offered and expected conduct. I agreed with the CEO, identified that there was some overlap there, that they both have to do with making sure that the traveling public has access to information, though one is there's a little bit of difference. And I think that that's also worth looking at and reconciling. And I think other board members have mentioned that in the survey as well.
Yes, that got several dings on there. Would the board be amenable to also having the service committee review that as well?
Maybe for a meeting right now, so we're
Pardon? Is there someone else speaking? I just heard someone. I thought I was going crazy.
No, I think that was probably one of my kids that you heard in the background.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe we might have missed Kyra or something, and it was just, yeah, was it a ghost? No, that's.
Kids are only supposed to drive Jesse crazy.
It doesn't take much anymore the older you get. That sounds good. So we have, let's see, we have 2.1.3 and then 2.1.2 and 2.1.3.1 overlap, both going to the service committee. Were there any other issues with this policy as written that the board wants to address? All right, seeing no discussion, thank you so much, Service Committee, Jesse, for taking that on, and thank you, Rich, and everyone for pointing that out. Appreciate it. Next was the treatment of staff. That is, one moment. Okay, that was page 66 is where the comment was. Was there anything else besides the stated noncompliance, and someone had made the comment that they felt January 2025 was too far out, and so Mr. Carpenter just shared that it was coming out in December of 2024. Were there any other issues with this policy that the board wanted to discuss? So, It's unclear and difficult to measure. 2.2.1.1 was the comment, which is interesting because we just attended, Matt and some of the staff and I attended you can measure anything. So it was addressed that it was difficult and muddy to work on, and I'm wondering how the board has reacted to that comment and what your feedback might be. And if there's no discussion, that is fine too. I'm not seeing any discussion, so it looks like oh, wait, go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, I think I don't really want to make more work for us, but I think that there's something at issue there because the interpretation of 2.2.1 that we accepted is that it's going to be compliant with 2.2.1.1 with its sub policy, the single sub policy, which to me means that that policy is redundant. Like if people are following me, that 2.2.1 is in compliance because 2.2.1.1 is compliant, and it doesn't have any evidence of its own or any standalone interpretation. And since we have accepted that, that seems like a strong indicator that it, at the very least, is redundant, if not also difficult to measure. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Is there any other discussion on the policy and the point that Mr. Miller just made? Is it something that the board wants to further explore? I'm not seeing a lot of traction on this one, Jesse. I think it's gonna die on the floor right there.
That's fine with me.
Thank you so much. And then we have emergency CEO succession. I don't believe there was anyone who wanted to make a discussion, but I just want to throw it out there that this now would be the time to talk about that policy. All right, there's nothing on that. And then the last policy is construction 210. Was there anyone who didn't feel that the policies are addressing or meeting the board's needs or the public's needs? All right, it looks like we are done having our policy discussions. And we are going to move on to 5.2, and that's Mr. Mike Alamang. We're going to discuss deleting policy 2.7.2, and that is on page 97 of your packet.
Yeah, I think we've actually had a few discussions at the board on this particular issue. Just to refresh everybody's memory, we have a policy 2.7.2 that has to do with 2.7 has to do with asset protection. We have policy 2.5, which has to do with financial condition. And each of those policies, 2.7.2 and 2.5.3, have pretty much the same language, and it's duplicative. And the Finance Committee discussed that and went along with Mr. Carpenter's recommendation that we just simply delete 2.7.2. Just in case you don't remember, this has to do with dispersing funds under controls that are that are insufficient to meet auditor standards. And that we feel that goes certainly best under financial condition, and that the policy under asset protection can just be deleted.
The Finance Committee is recommending deleting 2.7.2. Thank you so much for the thorough update here in the manual. I know we've been discussing this for some time. Is there any argument against, or is everyone in favor, or have any more questions about why it would be prudent to delete 2.7.2? Seeing no discussion, would someone like to make a motion for the board to Go ahead, Mike, say
I
it.
will move what was agreed to by the Finance Committee to delete 2.7.2.
Do I have a second? That would be Mr. Chris Allen. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and vote. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that is passing unanimously. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to the Finance Committee for working on this and getting a clean ending. Next on our agenda is the election recap, and that is Mr. Pfeiffer and Ms. Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually going to make a couple of introductory comments before turning it over to
of
my
course.
colleagues. Sorry, last minute pitch hitter stepping in here for just a moment.
No
So
worries.
just to have some context to this, hopefully discussion. We're interested in getting any thoughts or hearing any questions or concerns the board may have. So back in late September, we knew that we wanted to provide a greater understanding for you and for anyone watching as well as staff about how electoral decisions in our democracy can affect a transit agency. And providing an election recap after the general election in November seems like a good way to do that. So that's why it's on this agenda. Thank you to the Governance Committee for supporting this idea. So 2 weeks ago, there was a pretty pivotal election. Jeff is going to run through the details at the federal, state, and local levels, but this is a significant election, and there's a strong mandate for some sort of change out there. We know that, from conversations already within our agency, within the county, within the community, that some people, frankly, the idea of this change raises a certain degree of anxiety. Other people seem much happier with the idea. And our job as impartial, public servants is not to take sides in any of that sort of stuff. Just the facts. Here's the situation. That's what we're going to try to lay out for you this evening, as far as we can see it thus far. The dust, as they say, it has not begun to settle. It's only beginning to drift a little bit. We do not have answers. We don't claim to have any special knowledge about the future. We're going to do our best to avoid any sort of wild speculation or imply that we have special knowledge. But we've been talking about the implications a lot over the last couple of weeks, attending a lot of webinars in our industry, getting various takes on the implications of it, watching, like you, the latest news about nominations, for example. There is a lot that's simply unclear, and the uncertainty is probably the only certainty that we have for the time being. However, we have also, as an executive team, begun the discussions of how we may need to pivot, adjust, or just tack to the left, if you will, in order to continue moving forward successfully. There will be different opportunities, as we hear about, and probably some new emergent challenges. But we're going to do it best this evening to provide you with a quick update from Jeff and Dina on how things look at this point, with the dust not hardly settled. And then, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn it back to you. We'd love to hear your questions, your thoughts, and at least know what's on your mind. That way, as we continue to dig into this stuff, we'll know the sorts of things we should be looking to answers to. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jeff Pfeiffer.
Thanks, Matt. So as Matt said, just wanted to go over some top line items, results from the November 5th election. As I'm sure we're all aware, Donald Trump did defeat Vice President Kamala Harris, giving Republicans control of the White House, U.S. Senate, and U.S. House of Representatives. This is the first time that we've had this since this unified GOP control since 2017 to 2019. Earlier this week, President-elect Trump did tap former Congressman Sean Duffy to be Transportation Secretary. He still does have to go through the Senate confirmation process. The U.S. Senate current makeup after the election is looking like it'll be a 53 to 47 GOP advantage on the U.S. Senate. In Michigan, Alyssa Slotkin did defeat Mike Rogers. Slotkin is a Democrat, Rogers a Republican candidate, to replace Senator Debbie Stabenow, who announced she was retiring. And Senator-elect Slotkin will serve a 6-year term. The U.S. House of Representatives, I think today when I looked, the count is 219 to 213. Most indicators are predicting a 220 to 215 final makeup of the House. In our service area, Rep. Debbie Dingell was overwhelmingly reelected to office. And Alyssa Slotkin's former seat, which is Michigan's 7th Congressional District, part of the district is just slightly north of our service area. It was one of the most expensive congressional races in the entire country, very much a split seat. That did go from Democrat to Republican, with Tom Barrett defeating Curtis Hertel. And the other congressional change in Michigan, in the 8th Congressional District, mainly focused on more mid-Michigan area, longtime Congressman Dan Kildee from the Genesee County area announced he was not seeking re-election. And sitting Democratic State Senator Kristen McDonald-Rivet did win that election over the Republican, which is a nice segue into state politics update. Right now, the current makeup of the Michigan State Senate, which was not up for this time around, was a 20-18 majority by the Democrats, with McDonald-Rivet leaving. That does create an impetus for Governor Whitmer to set a special election. So more to come on that in the future. We did have a chamber flip in the Michigan House of Representatives. The Democrats had held a 56-54 very narrow majority. That is now a 58-52 GOP control of the Michigan House of Representatives. They did have caucus leadership elections earlier, late last week. The Republicans selected Matt Hall as Speaker of the House, and the Democrats selected Rajanu Puri to be the minority leader. He did serve as Transportation Appropriations Chair. For our area in particular, not many changes on the State House side. Most incumbents were reelected, with the exception of Felicia Brabeck, who did not seek reelection. She was succeeded by, I believe, one of her former staffers, Morgan Foreman, will be taking that role. And then the Michigan Supreme Court, Democrats expanded their majority on the bench to a now 6-2 hold. Some local updates. Ann Arbor City Council, Councilmember Lynn Song did not seek re-election. John Malik was elected to take her place. And in the Ypsilanti City Council, Amber Fellows, who I believe defeated the incumbent in the primary, was elected as well. A couple of ballot proposals in Washington County that did pass. There was a senior services millage, veteran relief, and a mental health and public safety millage. All of those passed. In the city of Ann Arbor, Prop A passed with nearly 80% of the vote. That establishes a city-run sustainable energy utility to help supplement DTE. And then also in the city of Ann Arbor, Prop C and D, which were election reform measures, did fail. Lastly, just want to leave you with a preview of the 2026 election. The great thing about politics is as soon as one election ends, you can look towards the next one. On the ballot in 2026, you'll have the entire House, U.S. House of Representatives, over 30 U.S. Senate seats. In Michigan, you'll have the governor's race, attorney general, secretary of state, the entire Michigan House of Representatives, and the Michigan State Senate, on top of numerous local elections. So that is my update.
All right. See if this is working. Is it working? Okay. So I'm going to pick that up with trying to kind of discuss just a little bit how this may impact us. I want to start by saying there have been a lot of discussions internally with staff. We've been talking to our federal lobbyists. We've talked to folks from the state. So a lot of what I'm going to say, I'm not going to try to speculate on what will happen. I want to kind of share with you where I think some of our risks are, if we have them, and remind you like kind of how this might affect us on a financial or even non-financial perspective. So I want to start by just reminding everyone of some of our primary funding sources that can be impacted by some of these elections regarding policy and things like that. Three primary sources that we have of federal and state funding. We have federal formula funding, which funds a lot of our capital, state of good repair, replacing buses, things like that. We have federal competitive funding, which is additional funding for advancing new projects, primarily is what we use discretionary money for, but some of that is for bus replacement as well. And we have MDOT funding, so we get operating assistance, state operating assistance from the state. So when thinking about that as a whole, I'll start more locally, right? So locally, what we know is that we have a strong millage in place till 2028. So our millage will sustain us for the next several years in terms of a big majority of our operating revenue. Additionally, we get 30% of our budget as state operating assistance. So if you remember from the budget discussions, those two sources are the primary funding source for operations. And we're very stable there. We've established some very significant reserves. So I think we're in a very good place operationally, and I think the message here is that we feel like we're financially stable. I think any risks there could come into play later when we're thinking about maybe renewal of our next millage. So even though we have this in place till 2028, we'll be looking to think about our next millage probably about 2026. And as Jeff mentioned, there's going to be a lot of change. So we're just going to keep abreast of that, maintain our financial stability and manage our operating budget effectively so that we can be in a good financial position going into that. From there, there's a small part of DOT funding, which is federal highway funds. We get a little bit of money from that. It's not anything significant. We're told that that's pretty safe. And even if it weren't, it's such a small amount, it's not going to be a risk for us. So that's a not risk area. Moving on to the federal side, we have federal earmarks for the YTC. Those are safe. We're completely confident. Anything prior to fiscal year 2026 regarding congressionally directed spending or earmarks are completely fine. So the good news is that initial funding for planning, design, and starting construction on the YTC, we're confident is secure, so we can continue to advance on our capital plan. Federal formula funding is secured by the IIJA bill until 2026. That, like I mentioned before, is money that we rely on for state of good repair and replacing, taking care of the assets that we have. We feel very confident that that's stable. There could be some changes once that bill, when we go into reauthorization for the next bill. We don't know what that will look like, and I can't speculate right now. But we're told, and what we've seen in the past is that does stay fairly stable. It's not something like that. That's something that every transit agency in the country gets. And so we're just a portion of that, and they want to make sure that we can maintain public transportation. So generally speaking, that's not a huge risk. Where we start getting a little bit more risk in terms of what we can do with funding is when we talk about our competitive funding. Those are right now one of the biggest things to our category of discretionary spending is the Low-No grant. So you all know we've been awarded the Low-No grant. We do not have it obligated yet. Having funds obligated is the most important thing. Once you have it obligated, it's safe from what they call clawbacks, which is where they can go in and kind of pull back money that was already awarded. We are really far along in the obligation process. We are waiting for a couple of approvals to get a little bit into the detail here, but waiting for a couple of approvals just to get that programmed in what's called the TIP, which is the Transportation Improvement Program with the state and our local MPO, SEMCOG. So once that gets approved in December, we'll be submitting our award application with the FTA. We've been working with the FTA to make sure that application is ready to go. As soon as that other approval comes, we'll be submitting by the end of the month. We're hoping it goes from there. It has to go to the Department of Labor, and we're hoping that they move through things quickly and can get that obligated by the end of January. But it is out of our control once we get that application in. And at this point, we've done everything we could as timely as we could to get that obligated. So we're just moving through the process. It takes some time, but we're getting there. We do feel that there is some risk if that doesn't get obligated by the end of January. There's a lot of speculation about what the newest administration might focus on starting out. We just don't know. We know that they have stated, the administration has stated that they're going to reinstate some tax cuts from 2017. What that's going to do is cause a budget deficit, and they're going to be looking for ways to make that up. We don't know where all the focus will be. We've heard some things, but the administration has said some things publicly, but we're not here to try and speculate. We're just here to try and do what we can to make sure we get those funds obligated as quickly as possible so they're protected. But it is our intent to continue to move forward with that. The other, I think, risk associated with the discretionary funding that relates specifically to our capital plan within the next few years is the YTC project. So we don't have that fully funded today. We have the 7.3 congressionally directed spending. We do have capital reserves that could be utilized to the extent we're not able to get as much discretionary money as we need. And that's something that we'll have to grapple with as time goes on and we get closer to construction. So there are some things, those are the things that I think we do know, that's how we're funded. Those are the major impacts that we think could be more local to us. What we don't know is if there will be clawbacks, any impacts of tariffs. So tariffs could affect overall costs of steel, glass, those commodities that we use to either build facilities or maintain buses or things like that. We're not really sure what the impacts of those will be, although in speaking, in hearing what the Bus Coalition had to say just this afternoon, kind of confirmed my initial thought of that even if steel prices go up, most of the buses are local builds. Buy America is still in place. And so as long as that's the case and those buses are being built here, even though some of the parts and such come from, may at times come from other sources, or the commodity to build those parts comes from other places, it would be, we think, fairly minimal in terms of the impact. We've been hit with some heavy inflation in the past few years. We've been able to weather that, and we feel right now reasonably comfortable that we'll be able to weather impacts of that without significant impacts, but we'll have to wait to see how that plays out. What we also don't know are changes in policy that could affect future grant eligibility or future grant reporting and compliance. Those will be things like indirect, those are things that could cause indirect cost. So they might change policies or procedures, things that would implicate how we have to report. We sign grants and assurances. Anytime you accept federal funding, you have grants assurances that say, these are all the things we're going to do to comply to federal requirements. There are all kinds of things in there that we have to comply with, and we don't know how those will change. One example is some of the changes that we've been talking about here at the board level with the PTASP, the safety plan. The last administration made some changes that made that more onerous. We don't know what policies like that or that policy in particular could be affected by the next administration. So we'll just have to wait and see, but we want you to know that besides the financial impacts, there are non-financial impacts or potentially indirect financial impacts that we just don't know. So in closeout, I want to assure the board that that we're focused on mitigation of risk. So I've pointed out some risks here. The best thing we can do is maintain strong financial controls over our spending, take care of the reserves that we have built, and use those very sparingly and wisely. We'll have to make some tough decisions based on funding opportunities. The other thing we're doing, and you kind of probably see it here with many of us that talk here at board meetings, we're staying tuned to emerging items through our federal lobbyist participation, our state lobbyists, the MPTA, participation in APTA, participation with the Bus Coalition, a lot of conversation internally. So our team is very intent on keeping up on what's going on, advocating for public transportation, and staying involved that way. And the other thing we are prepared to do as an agency, and I think have done very well, is stay adaptable. We'll have to go with the flow a little bit when these changes come. Sometimes we'll have to make tough decisions, but we'll be doing that with an informed portfolio and looking at all the risks and taking our time to make the best recommendations for the agency that we can. And with that kind of concludes the comments I had prepared for you. Jeff and I and Matt are still here to answer any questions that you have about anything we've mentioned or anything we didn't.
Thank you. Does anyone on the board, and I'm sure we do, have lots of questions and comments? I'm not seeing, oh, go ahead, Mike.
You mentioned, Dina, that, of course, tariffs could affect costs of various things that become parts of things that we buy. The flip side might be, of course, the new administration seems to be very supportive of the oil and gas industries and more drilling and those kinds of things. And I would tend to think that would have a lowering effect on the cost of our fuel. Is that something that might offset some of the effect of the tariffs, or maybe even more than offset it?
It could, if that occurs, although I think some of the tariffs, my understanding is some of the tariffs could actually increase costs at first until we're able to pursue like the additional drilling and things
Well,
like that.
I was talking about tariffs increasing your cost, yes.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, there could be tariffs affecting fuel as well, is what I mean. So,
Oh, okay, yeah.
so it may not decrease costs right away or at all, but what we're doing right now, what we did in the budget, obviously, we didn't know what we know now, but in the budget, we tend to be fairly conservative. I will say when, in the last administration, fuel costs, they did go up. We were able to weather that. So it is a big cost item, as you know, in our budget. It's not the largest, but it is something that we'll continue to monitor.
And of course, I believe the US is the biggest producer of oil and gas in the world now.
Yeah.
One other question, if I might, and this is potentially much more minor, but something I don't understand. I know at the state level, for a number of years, there's been a lot of discussion about the gas tax. There's been more recently, and don't seem to be getting anywhere on it. But I imagine eventually something will replace the gas tax. And I do know that it mainly goes to the roads, but I believe that there is a component that goes to transit. Do we get any revenue from the gas tax at the state level?
Yes, we do. The fund that the gas taxes go into is a big part of the funding for our state operating assistance.
Okay, so
So-
can you ballpark how many dollars we benefit from the gas tax?
I wouldn't want to off the cuff, but I'm happy to bring that and share
Okay,
it
sure.
in the future.
Okay,
Our funding is the operating assistance that we get is about 30% of our budget. We've already seen pressures on that with the increase in inflation that we've seen. I don't know if you recall, but earlier this year, there was an early indicator from the state that our operating assistance would be reduced from 29.6% down to 26%. But the state was able to find additional funding to supplement that fund. If they are not continuing to be able to do that, we could see a drop to 26% as early as next year, and that would have nothing to do with changes in the gas tax. So it is something that is a concern for us if there are changes related to the gas tax. Whether if it lowers that fund or if it increases, it would be beneficial to us.
Matt?
If I might, yeah, Dina is absolutely correct. We do get a healthy dose of funding through the state comprehensive transportation fund that flows down to all the transit systems. And it has been under some stress. I know I'm going to ask Jeff to maybe speak a little bit about some of the stuff going on in the lame duck session of the state legislature, because the state budget that was passed recently sort of held funding, I think, steady for LBO. There's some hope for increasing it, but I'll let Jeff speak to, where things stand in the closing days of the state legislature.
Sure. So yeah, as Matt said, we are in lame duck right now at the state level. One of the topics of conversation, I know we've discussed it with the board previously, is the SOAR fund. Still trying to figure out if a deal can be made and if transportation is going to be a part of that, that going forward. But obviously, one of the items that we're very concerned about and constantly looking at is sustainable funding long-term for public transportation. As Dina mentioned, we had one-time funding multiple times. So really one of the top items that MPTA and transit organization across the state will be working on is long-term sustainable funding for transportation. The SOAR funding, it's tough to predict right now. There's a lot going on in Lansing. Some are doubting they will pass very much in lame duck, some maintaining that they will eventually get a lot of things through. Right now, it's just too tough to tell where a lot of the legislation stands, and even more particularly the SOAR fund.
Susan?
So I know everything is early, but I'm curious if our Washington lobbyists, if our folks in Washington are hearing anything about a few things. There's a certain individual who's been brought in who's known for electric cars, if they're speculating that hydrogen might be we're shifting away, but we're going to go to electricity-powered vehicles, if we're going to be going to autonomous vehicles. This person is also there for this new government efficiency position, which hasn't existed before, and I'd hate to think transit is one of the things that are on their target list. I was just curious that there's all sorts of questions that I have about that, and I'm curious if you're hearing anything, at least initially, in that realm. These are all supposed to be change makers, and so they're supposed to come in, make a lot of noise, and I'm just curious if they've started to even define what government efficiency is, for instance. So anyway.
How much time you got? No, yes, and we're seeing the same news reports everyone else is, and I'll ask my colleagues to sort of weigh in on it. Republican administrations are traditionally not big fans of public transit. They generally leave it alone. It's more like a benign neglect at the federal level than it is an active hunt. If you look at the statements that the Trump administration and its various hangers-on have made, not sure what his status is. They're shooting at the Justice Department, Immigration, Treasury Department, oddly, I heard today. I didn't realize that was one of them. DEI, culture war issues. Yes, we've heard that environmental sustainability issues likely to be a target in some way. But when you look at the public, and all those things are important, and I don't mean to minimize that there's a broader community. We don't exist in a vacuum, and there could be some anxiety elsewhere outside this agency. But for our focus on this, the transportation DOT budget overall is a drop in the water compared to military, Medicaid, some of these much larger federal things. So if you're interested in shrinking the budget or hacking away the swamp or the administrative state, DOT is a strange place to start. It's just a small thing. And when we look at our low-no grant, $25 million isn't even a rounding error in this sort of hunting thing. So we do expect less favorable terms on environmental federal initiatives. What exactly that means, we have no idea. In terms of autonomous vehicles, that's an interesting one because we went through Project 2025 and read that whole thing. There's definitely, even today the Republican Party, like the Democratic Party, is a big tent, and there's lots of different factions within it, kind of arm wrestling over what we're going to do. There is a free market impulse still very strong in the Republican Party and the Democratic Party too, but in the Republican Party in particular, that very much sort of an almost techno-utopian kind of thing where autonomous cars are going to save everything, and therefore we don't need to spend any of this other money. Is that going to happen? I don't know. So there's a lot to unpack there. It's kind of a fur ball, but I'll ask my colleagues what else they would note on some of those discussions.
I think just maintaining it's too early to tell right now. I prefer to let it develop a little bit and see if we can get a clearer indication, but right now it's just too tough to predict.
Julie.
Thank you. I've been hearing a lot about different organizations undergoing some risk mitigation around, changing words to avoid being targeted as a result of some sort of, algorithm that's used to detect policies. And as a policymaking body, do you think, I don't expect you to answer this question today, but, should we be thinking about reviewing policies with an eye to avoid that kind of targeting, especially being known as, a progressive community? I think we're, at the state level, we had this nice 2 years where they liked Ann Arbor, and now probably not as much. And, are there things around like DEI that that accomplish the same things, but just use different words. Same thing around equity, you know, where we don't give up our values, but maybe avoid that kind of review or targeting.
If I might, I hadn't heard the algorithm one, but that's a new one. We can certainly go back and look, but right now, my impression is that our risk exposure and that sort of thing is not very high. We've always followed in hiring, for example, Civil Rights Act of 1964 and all the titles within that and all those laws that pertain to it. So we're not exposed, for example, the way some institutions of higher learning have found themselves to be on the hot seat in the last few years. We're generally much below the radar. Could we get lumped in with Ann Arbor in general? Absolutely. It's in our name. That's a real risk. Are we a big enough target to make it on the radar? I don't know. We're the transit agency, certainly not. We're very small potatoes. When we look at our industry more broadly, there are transit agencies with much greater exposure, particularly on the financial side, with large rail projects or other things that are partially in progress. I believe, was it Trump who hated the tunnel in Manhattan? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got a hate on for, which tunnel was it? Hudson? There's a tunnel under the Hudson that was approved a couple years ago. I don't know that they've started construction, but he's expressed extreme dislike for that particular piece of infrastructure. That's the kind of thing, symbolic, high value target, very visible, that sort of thing. But I will double check about that sort of thing, but I think right now we don't have anything to hide.
Are there any other questions? Susan?
I already spoke, but I just had a curiosity. With an election like this or a lot of new faces, what does the transit industry in general and what do we do as far as educating new electeds about the value of transit, the impact in the communities? I mean, this is very granular, it's very local, but I'm just curious, when you have such a sea change, so many seats changing hands, and as was mentioned, we're going to see even more down the road. I'm just curious, especially since there seems to be in the air this need to be change agents. What are our collective and maybe our own individual efforts on educating new electeds about the value of this? Because many of them maybe have never ridden a bus before or taken a train. Many of them may not realize how much of their workforce or how much impact is happening around them. And until we bring it to them, they may not be putting it on their radar. So I was just curious if there is an APTA effort, if there's a AAATA effort. What do we do in these moments of a lot of changing leadership? How to bring this value to them so they're aware of it?
That's a great point, Susan. I think, doing our best to ensure we're communicating with these folks and getting in there. Luckily for us, our service here had not too many changes with this election. Obviously, with the new state reps, we'll be working with MPTA as our lobbyists and executive directors start to go introduction meetings with all the new members. Same thing on the federal level, just a much larger scale. But for us, maintaining contact with our elected officials. I know Matt and I discussed today, at some point having them come to the garage and get that rolling would be great to have them see it hands-on. But for us, it's really maintaining that contact, sending updates, and working to educate them.
I'll add, and you may recall, I think the trip to DC last year, this year, we paid a visit to then Representative Slotkin's office just to introduce ourselves. And okay, good call. At least we've got one visit, and we'll be back. It's something I would add to Jeff's point on the local level, which I think is at the state level, that's fairly straightforward. Federal level, even the numbers get smaller. The local level is you have way more people. Luckily, they're all generally supportive, if maybe not incredibly knowledgeable about our specific field. They're generally supportive. really getting out there much more, frankly, than we've done in recent years, much more, is getting started. And I was happy that Rich was able to report that we've got these initial mayoral supervisor meetings. Once we, from a courtesy perspective, we want to have those first and then begin meeting probably with city councilors on a personal basis, getting to know them, educating them, and very much see that as half and half advocacy / ownership linkage. So we see, sort of staff, board member teams going out to do that, also a force multiplier, if you will. So I think a lot of that work is going to be coming. Through the MPTA, and we heard on the Bus Coalition, we're going to hear more about working across the aisle in our industry. We're going to hear more about the transit agencies that operate in the strongly Republican counties. Even Ottawa County has a transit system. And it's a very granular, nuts and bolts, human services sort of thing, helping primarily seniors and persons with disabilities. But in those communities, it matters and it has value, even if it's a very rural area. So those members of our association can speak to their elected leaders, frankly, in a way that the head of the Ann Arbor Transit Authority might not be able to get across, and a much more direct way of their community. So that's where the value of these associations really starts to come in, that we can sort of work as a group in that respect. So we'll be helping them out. We are putting a lot of effort into making the state association as strong as it can be, and it's going very well. I'm quite happy with its recent trajectory since they have a new executive director. So I hope that's at least a taste in that direction.
Yeah, no, that's actually very helpful. Can I just ask one more question? You just used the word senior. This is completely related to the local. I heard almost nothing about, I think it was Proposal 3, which was the county senior services proposal. And as someone in that demographic that I know absolutely nothing about it, I did know it did pass. Are some of those funds available for them to provide to seniors in our service area or caregivers or anything related to transportation? Are you aware of how the dollars can be spent?
I know transportation was one of the elements of the millage, but I don't know the specifics. Happy to delve into that and we'll circle back.
We noted that there was a real deficit of pre-election information. In the last week before the election, some things started to get out there. There was a video chat, and I think a website got launched. It was very, very late. I think my absentee ballot had been in for like a week and a half by the time anything showed up. So we know very little about that one, quite frankly. I think it was approved by the Board of Commissioners, but I think unless you were digging into their paperwork and their video, it's very hard to find the information. I do think transportation was an eligible expense, but we don't know it's a county thing, so I assume it's available to people in every part of the county, including our area, but we really have very little details.
Are there any other questions or comments? I have one question. I want to make sure that I heard everything correctly. So we're moving forward. We just implemented the rest of our millage plans in August, and it's very much on my mind. How are we moving forward? And in my mind, we're safe for the next year, and how are we planning for that?
So we are funded for those services. We did collect our first year of revenue from the millage cycle this summer, late summer and fall. That funding is in place, and I can probably point to that when we go through our fourth quarter financial statement. You'll see a change in assets there, and I will highlight that. So we are funded, and our millage is secure. So we believe, we don't see any change to those services anytime in the near future, other than we've fully implemented them already, which was a change, but we don't see any reason to be concerned about a change in service in the near term.
So if I may, the concern about dollars and money and how things may be possibly adversely affected on the transportation end at the federal level will not have any implications of the dollars that we receive. Our millage is safe, but everything else may have some a look-see later on, like,
Yeah, it will come into play when we talk about, our millage is a 5-year millage. So that question will come into play when we need to go back to the voters in 5 years, or less than that now. As you might remember, we had that millage approved in 2022 and is just now in place for the services. So that's where that would come into play. I'd also like to point out that, thank the board. Part of that millage proposal was to reduce reliance on federal funding in our operating budget. And we have received the millage funding for that. And that makes that, our operations even that more stable.
wonderful. Matt?
Yeah, I'd just like to build on what Dina was saying, and she's absolutely correct. Our millage funds are a local decision. They are completely insulated from state and federal decisions. That's not to say, and in so much that the new services are drawing primarily off that, that's very secure. But there are always going to be bumps, and there's no such thing as a turbulence-free transit budget. We're tracking several things right now that may or may not emerge as financial concerns. I'll give you a taste, and we don't throw these things at you on a regular basis because half of them, never turn into anything. We've talked about LBO and how that can fluctuate naturally, and sometimes it fluctuates a bit more than we like. With the state house going back Republican, how is that going to affect things? The spike in costs statewide for inflation over the last couple of years put a lot of stress on LBO. We are actually very fortunate here because of our millage that it provides a bit of a buffer against those fluctuations. Other smaller transit authorities throughout the state are, that has an immediate direct effect. 1/10 of a percentage point change to them is the difference between running on Tuesday. So we're nowhere near that, thank goodness, but we watch it very carefully. Right now, there is a bill in the lame duck session at the state about changes to a Transit Incorporation Act for Wayne County. Wayne County is attempting to get rid of the Swiss cheese funding that they have, and it's bedeviled smart. You may recall Oakland County got rid of that a year ago, earlier this year, and Wayne County wants to follow suit. In order to do that, they're pursuing it through a different mechanism, changed a piece of state legislation that would apply only to them. If they were to do that and get more local money and provide more transit service, they would be eligible for more of that limited LBO, local bus operating pot. So the percentage has, the same pie has to get spread among more mouths. And that can be, if it's a little bit, not a big problem. Wayne County might be more than a little bit. So that could be an emergent issue. And, finally, for the long-range plan, I think going forward, that's something we started hearing about today with one of the advocacy groups in DC. With the election behind us, the next big thing is the Federal Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. This is the 5-year bill where Congress says, this is what we want to pay for transportation. This is here's the total amount that we're going to authorize, not appropriate, which is an annual thing, but overall, this is what's going to be in there. The Infrastructure Act that we heard about included, I'd say over half of that was the Surface Transportation Bill, which has been going on for 50 years. That's going to either September next year or September 26. Is it next year?
Next year.
Next year. So now everyone's pivoting. They're going to, dust themselves off after this election. That's the next big thing in DC. That's where they will decide how much money is going into the next version of Low-No, how much money is going into the Federal Aviation Administration, how much money is going into the bus and bus facilities grant, BRT sorts of things. So our future competitive discretionary grant applications are going to be limited or expanded based on what's in that bill next year. And that bill is going to be passed under the current trifecta of Republican control. So we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. And one of the things that's interesting about transportation is pretty much every congressional district in the country loves that investment. And congressmen and senators love to bring that bacon home. So it has been very resistant over the decades to budget cutting.
Okay.
But it does tilt back and forth between roads and transit or rail or aviation. Those differences of degree do happen. So that's probably the next big thing for us to watch. Doesn't affect the millage services that we have on, but it does affect the execution of the long-range plan.
Thank you. Are we, okay. Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much for all of that important information. Got very somber in here. Next on our agenda is the bus lanes and BRT project update, and that is Mr. Forrest Yang. Yes, he will. Pep us back up, Mr. Forrest.
Okay. Well, thanks, Madam Chair. As you can tell, and Raymond's ready to give you an update. I just say a few words. Staff have been working with some partner agencies on a few initiatives related to, bus lanes, bus rapid transit. We're working hard to push, to include transit component in their final recommendations. We made some good progress, so we thought it's time to give you a quick update. So there you go, Raymond. You.
Very good. Thank you, Forrest, for the introduction. Madam Chair, Board of Directors, Raymond Hess, Manager of Project Management and Delivery. So I'm excited today to come before you to talk about some recent advancements on projects that are identified in our long-range plan, specific to bus lanes and bus rapid transit. So if I use the acronym BRT, I am referring to bus rapid transit, and we'll kind of walk through some recent developments. So just as to start off as a refresher, this map should look familiar to you. This is kind of the future vision for TheRide. This is from our long-range plan, TheRide 2045. And really the lines to pay attention to on this map are those red lines. The red lines are sort of the spine of our future network. They are the bus rapid transit network. We have a north-south spine that pretty much runs along State Street, and then it turns into roughly Plymouth, and then an east-west spine that runs along Washtenaw to Huron to Jackson. And from that, the idea is that all of our fixed route kind of, radiates off of those spines. And just for some additional context, when we talk about things like bus rapid transit, we're really talking about kind of that next evolution of transit. This may mean things that enhance the reliability and efficiency of transit. Really what you try to hope for are dedicated bus lanes, getting buses out of general purpose traffic in their own dedicated facility, because in that way you're not competing with traffic. But that may not be possible everywhere for reasons that you can probably imagine, especially in tight urban settings. So there are other amenities that you could look at, such as transit signal priority or queue jump lanes, things that allow buses to kind of get ahead of traffic, or keep things moving through signal modifications and things like that. So there are several projects in the works right now that are going to advance some of these initiatives. I'm going to cycle through 3 of those and tell you about some of our future plans going forward. So the first thing I'd like to highlight is a project on State Street. This is a city infrastructure project. It's a capital project, and initially was initiated by, I think, a underground water utility. And as is oftentimes the case, anytime the city has to tear up the road to get underground to do the utility, underground utilities, they look for opportunities to reconfigure that roadway. And in this project, the city and the university came together and looked at the opportunities to incorporate enhancements to bicycle pedestrian infrastructure as well as transit infrastructure. And so the leading thought right now is to put in a queue jump lane that would run from South University to William. The queue jump lane would run on the northbound or east side of the road only. Part of the reason for that is, first of all, both TheRide and the university buses both run north on that section of State Street. University buses do not run south. TheRide does, but not the university. And in terms of just operational efficiency, the northbound movement is probably the most important. That is kind of the inbound trips for our buses. So these are, patrons who are trying to make connections at the Blake. So really that last sort of segment is really important for our riders to get them to the Blake Transit Center on time. And then obviously, you know, all the students that are using the blue buses and faculty as well. A lot of those buses turn up to go into North U and the Central Campus Transit Center. This is about 1,000-foot long segment, if I didn't mention that earlier. So it's a relatively small block, but it's an important one. You know, it's right in central downtown. It's right next to Central Campus. It's a high-profile location. The installation of these facilities would result in the removal of on-street parking, but the on-street parking is less desirable in the grand scheme of transportation than the bicycle, pedestrian, and transit infrastructure that's identified in local policies. So as you see here on the slide, there is a conceptual rendering that was put together by the city and the university showing what this concept could look like. You can see the inclusion of the you know, widened sidewalks, moving some of the curb line out a little bit, then the accommodation of a bike lane that's buffered, and then you have that transit lane on the east side of the road, northbound traffic. On this slide too, you can also see there's a pedestrian sort of landing area for the riders that are getting on and off our buses. So then that way they're not getting off right into a bike lane. There's sort of this landing pad that allows our patrons to get off safely and securely without having to worry about sort of that conflict with cyclists. Looking at a different segment, this is in front of the Museum of Art, you'll see a similar sort of concept. Again, in this situation, there is a bus stop. So we have sort of this little bus landing pad for our patrons to get on and off the bus. And then you'll see even these little kind of tiny crosswalks to cross the bike lane are enumerated there as well. There's still some design that's being done on this project, especially at the northern terminus. We want to understand how buses can kind of get through the signal at William. There are different movements that happen. I'm sure you can appreciate that some of our buses turn left onto William to get to the Blake. Other buses go north. So just trying to figure out what that movement looks like, what the signal looks like. There is a preliminary indication that we would get a dedicated transit signal. This is a special signal that should be unrecognizable to most motorists, but it is something that our drivers would be trained on that really gives a green light to buses and nobody else. But it's actually not a green light. It's kind of like a little line. It's a sideways line or a straight line indicating whether buses can go or stop. The idea here is that as traffic has a red light, buses would then have this green light to kind of pull out ahead, get ahead of that traffic, and then be able to maintain their schedules. Moving on to another project, Washtenaw Avenue from Carpenter to Rosedale. This is an MDOT project. They're engaged in a planning and environmental, excuse me. They're engaged in a planning and environmental linkages study. What that means is it's pretty much a pre-NEPA or pre-environmental assessment. It kind of helps look at the alternatives that are out there to come up with a preferred alternative, or what they call an acceptable alternative. The concept that MDOT is currently identified as their acceptable alternative includes dedicated bus lanes on both sides of the road. So this would be both eastbound and westbound on both the north and south sides of the road, from roughly Carpenter all the way to Rosedale, which is just past Hewitt. This is an exciting concept. This would be between the last project and this project might represent some of the first dedicated bus lanes in the community. The stretch of this project is roughly 2 miles long, so it's not insignificant in terms of, excuse me, just a little short on, I'm getting over a cold, so I'm a little short-winded right now. Yeah, I know, I'm getting verklempt. So these are fairly significant advancements for transit in the area. Represents a lot of good opportunity for us as an agency, and really kind of elevates transit as a very competitive form of transportation to get around the community. It would be, as convenient taking the bus on this section of Washtenaw as any other form of transportation. Taking another look at it, this would be more like at the street level, what the view would look like. So again, these dedicated lanes running from roughly Carpenter all the way to Rosedale. Tying into that project is a separate project that MDOT is conducting, which is looking at US 23. from M14 down to I-94. Part of that project includes looking at the interchanges and possible reconfiguration of those interchanges. So the most important among those is the Washtenaw interchange. Currently, the Michigan Department of Transportation is looking at redoing the Washtenaw interchange. What you see here is what's called a cloverleaf interchange. I'm sure you can appreciate why it's called that. This design does have some sort of safety concerns. There's a lot of weaving. I'm sure you can appreciate as cars are coming off the freeway, cars getting on the freeway. There's a lot of jockeying for space. So MDOT wants to clean that up a little bit. And one of their leading proposals right now is what they're calling a partial cloverleaf. This seems to be the one that has the most traction on it. So they would still maintain sort of the two kitty corner cloverleaf petals, for lack of a better term. So the northeast quadrant and the southeast quadrant would still have sort of that cloverleaf look. And then the northwest quadrant and southeast quadrant would have more of a straight ramp, or what we'd sometimes call a diamond interchange sort of configuration. This eliminates a lot of that weaving. It would have more signal control. And MDOT is looking at configurations that could also accommodate future transit, dedicated transit lanes. So we don't have snazzy conceptual renderings because this project isn't that far along yet, but the areas in red are where there are opportunities for dedicated transit lanes. Now, you might be questioning, why isn't it red the whole way through? Part of the reason for that is just, quite frankly, cars needing to get onto or off of the freeway need to be able to intermix, to get onto those on-ramps, right? These are all at-grade facilities, so some of that intermixing with general purpose traffic and transit traffic is to be expected. Next is a planning study conducted by the Downtown Development Authority and the City of Ann Arbor. It's looking at the downtown area circulation study. This is really just trying to bring harmony across several different plans. It was quickly realized that between the cities moving together towards Vision Zero, the university's campus master plan, the DDA's plans, as well as the TheRide's 2045 plan, that there were a lot of suggestions out there, but perhaps we needed to find a more cohesive vision for what downtown could look like and what was sort of the hierarchy of need for transit, bikes, peds, vehicles. And so this plan is moving along. There were public engagement sessions held earlier this month in this very building. And some of the ideas floated out for transit include future transit improvements on Huron. And specifically, you'll see in the description here, Huron Street transit lanes, reserve space for potential transit-only lanes. So this is the recommendation that's coming out of that study as well. So you can see that each of these kind of fit together nicely. You have the two projects on Washtenaw eventually turn into Huron. There's some good synergy there. And then you also have the project on State Street as well, which is not far from this location. To give you a little bit of, and I kind of skipped over this, but in terms of where each one of these projects are in their implementation, the State Street project is going to happen and start construction next year. That is a 2025 project. And so the city is, I think, actually getting it ready to bid as we speak. The second project that I highlighted for you, the Washtenaw Pell, that project is not funded for construction. But it does set up the state for implementation to acquire some of that funding for that project, since they're doing it through a planning environmental linkages study. And then lastly, the US 23 Washtenaw interchange. That project is tentatively scheduled for construction in 27. However, the state has not procured all the funding for that project yet. And the transit elements in particular, the state is probably going to look to TheRide to figure out how to help fund the pieces that benefit TheRide and benefit transit. So again, based on the conversation you heard earlier from Matt, Jeff, and Dina, we're looking at what those funding opportunities might be. In terms of our next steps, what we're looking at is how can we take some of the work that's been done, especially on the Washtenaw Pell, and extend it further to the west into the city of Ann Arbor. Obviously, the section from 23 into Ypsi is a good first step, but that represents less than half of the route. So are there other opportunities to extend it further to the west? We also want to try to figure out kind of what our strategy is in defining our role in bus rapid transit and dedicated bus facilities, and maybe taking more of a pronounced position on these projects. And then, the other thing is we're in constant conversation with all of our local partners. So for example, I met with the, manager of the city's capital improvement program, Kayla Coleman, and we flagged any project that was identified in our plan as a bus rapid transit for consideration of dedicated bus facilities on city capital projects. So again, this isn't a guarantee that that's going to happen, but at least the project managers know, the policymakers at the city know that there's an alignment of what our plans show and what the city is showing. And then lastly, we want to kind of figure out what our long-term strategy is for engagement with stakeholders and the public. So we're working on some documents in that space. Sounds like I'm about to cry, but I'm really just, I'm just winded. So my apologies. So we're currently working on some of those educational promotional materials so that people can understand what this means. They can understand the benefit of what such facilities could be, not just for transit riders, but for the community, as a whole. There are a lot of benefits of dedicated bus lanes. Not only do they implement the policies that have been passed, but there are safety benefits. We talked about safety earlier tonight. There's a whole slew of benefits that we hope could be realized as a result of these projects. And with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Do you want to take a minute, Raymond? Are you going to be okay?
Yeah, I know.
All right, let's open it up to the board of directors for conversation. And the first one is Julie.
Thank you. Some of this, I feel like some of the biggest barriers are more, with the community. In terms of the cost of some of these projects, how much of it is major reconstruction cost and how much of it is more cosmetic, like paint and lanes and things that might have more of like a social cost than with people being angry with us first, which is cool, versus like paint.
Yeah, I think you're right to pick up on a very interesting opportunity, which is that some of these projects can be implemented for little capital investment, that it could really just be paint and post type projects. Now, I think the other part of that is that probably will come with a trade-off. We can stripe a lane as a dedicated bus lane, but where did we get that lane from? Did we take it away from general purpose traffic? Did we take it away from some other space? So that trade-off is, I think, probably the thing that we'll have to focus on the most in terms of messaging. But you're right, the actual capital outlay for a bus lane, especially if you're using existing right-of-way, if you're using the existing pavement, need not be prohibitively expensive.
Thank you. It's my opinion that, if we are looking at perhaps, restrictions and other kinds of funding, this is a place where we can still make real progress. Because the capital investment is not as significant.
Right.
Yes, Susan.
Hey, Raymond. So I've got a few questions on the State Street project and then just one question on Washtenaw. So the three are about sort of design elements. The first is one of the benefits of the parking on State Street is actually providing handicap access to Angel Hall, to the Art Museum. And we learned trying to put access back on a place that had stripped off parking, which was Huron Street, we couldn't. And we heard a lot about people going to the courts and many people in wheelchairs and so forth just not having access because there wasn't that kind of provision. So the first question is, removing the parking also removes handicap access. What considerations are being thought through? The second is, one of the challenges of a recent design was to put a lot of crosswalks, which just hampers transit. Every time I'm on you're just sitting waiting for that one person to cross. So will there be an adjustment on the number and location of the crosswalks across State Street? And the third was, why not start the queue jump down at that very confusing Hill Packard State? Why wait all the way to South U why not strip that parking off in front of the law school? It seems like there's a benefit, since eventually we're going to be going to a BRT in that general area. Why wait and just do the 1,000 feet? Why not do 1,500 feet? So those are my 3 design questions about it. I'm sure all of that was talked about, and I'm sure there's good answers on all of them.
Yeah, I think in terms of parking, and especially accessible parking, that's largely controlled by the DDA. My understanding is the DDA is doing a study right now on accessible parking. My impression is, and I don't know if other of you have had the same impression, but if you're driving down State Street trying to find parking, good luck to you, right? I mean, it's just a very congested roadway. It's just a high demand area. And when, in my discussions with the city, even in my former capacity, when we looked at sort of the mode split, like what forms of transportation are using State Street, pedestrians are number 1. You can appreciate that, just the number of people walking up and down the sidewalks. Transit is number 2. If you've ever been on a bus on that section of State Street, it's standing room only on both our buses and blue buses. And then, the split between cars and bikes is kind of, probably similar. And so, when we had those discussions, we were really trying to figure out what is the priority here. And so pedestrians were kind of put first and foremost, and then followed by transit. Storing cars was probably one of the lowest priority subjects. So I think, the point about accessible parking is well taken, but if we remove parking for that whole block, at least we're consistent the way through, and the DDA is looking at accommodations on other side streets and other nearby areas. Let's see, the second question.
So I had, the crosswalks seem to have just been installed, and they didn't seem to coordinate very much with the transit. And I've often had that experience where people are just crossing now because they're being encouraged. And I wondered if there had been an examination of the quantity and location of those crosswalks. It seemed like an opportunity to at least examine it.
Yeah, my understanding is I don't think there are any changes to the crosswalks proposed. There's some, discussion about, raised crosswalks and things like that. Crosswalks are always kind of an interesting thing because the city tries to put them where there are natural desire lines because there's a recognition that even if there isn't a painted crosswalk, pedestrians may still run across the street. Right in front of this building is a good example. And so the idea is really just trying to figure out, what is the best way to consolidate where pedestrians cross to make it safe, but then also put them in places where we would expect them to actually use it. So I think all the crosswalks that exist now on this section of State Street, I don't believe there are any addition of new ones, as I recall. Most of them are, existing. They are heavily used, and I know that still is a pain point. But it is just kind of the nature of being in this very urban space adjacent to the campus where there's just high pedestrian activity.
And then the third one was, why not start this down at that wonderful, crazy intersection? As long as you're stripping off parking, it seems like a really natural place to start rather than at the top of the hill and just go for 1,000 feet.
Yeah, I think we've heard that recommendation from others as well. I think the easy answer is this is the capital project before us. This is the opportunity. I'm sure you can appreciate that south of South University was done last year and the year before. So that project is complete. That's not to say it can't be revisited. That's not to say that if this project works really well and achieves, the goals of the city, the university, the community at large, that we can't look at extending it further to the south or to the north. But I think this as a sort of standalone pilot was just somewhat opportunistic. It was just, there was this capital project before us, and so now's the opportunity to capitalize on it.
Makes sense. I mean, again, it's a strange thing. There's just bike lanes on that versus this. I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, but. And then to my question about Washtenaw, one of the things we had learned a little while ago was the RTA is capturing dollars from some federal funding to go toward multi-jurisdictional projects. And the BRT and, well, more specifically, the bus lanes on Washtenaw seem like an opportunity to bring the RTA in, even in initial phase before we get to BRT. I didn't hear you mention any of their role in the funding as we go forward, because I think that's another partner that's sort of waiting out there to prove its strength as a multi-jurisdictional agency, helping to coordinate transit projects. So I was just curious what role they may play, maybe even initially that first section, the easy section, IPSI, much less the next section as we get into Ann Arbor.
Yeah, point well taken. And I know Forrest has actually tasked me with trying to solidify that relationship with the RTA on this project. The good news is it is identified in their plans, the BRT on Washtenaw. So we already have a little bit of a foothold into kind of their policy documents and their guiding documents. I think the question now is really just what is our next move? What is our next step going to be? We can extend the planning environmental linkages study that the MDOT did, or we could maybe take a different approach. And then I think once we have an internal strategy, we'd probably want to float that to the RTA and possibly other partners as well. Things along the state trunk line are complicated, probably more so than others because it's MDOT controlled. It crosses over many jurisdictions. You have these regional partners like the RTA and Watts and SEMCOG as well that might be a partner. So I think it presents an interesting opportunity for us, but we'll definitely want to collaborate with as many stakeholders as possible.
And we have Jesse online. Go ahead, Jesse.
Thank you. I really appreciate the analysis of these distinct plans and bringing them together under the context of our LRP. With that in mind, we're looking at the plans drawn up by a handful of autonomous organizations like MDOT, the City of Ann Arbor, the DDA. And while I'm very pleased to see that they do appear to be in line with the LRP, I have a sense of how we're involved with the planning that MDOT is doing. Been following that pretty closely, but I was hoping you could speak a little bit more to how our efforts are going with the other entities to ensure that we're all pulling in the same direction and not running into a situation where a plan that is proposed by one of the entities is not in line with our LRP and we end up having to do remedial work just to kind of keep it's got to be difficult kind of managing these these aligned but separate ideas and organizations.
Yeah, point well taken. I think one of the challenges before us is we don't own the underlying infrastructure, right? The roadway is under the control of a jurisdiction, whether that be the cities, the road commission, the state Department of Transportation. So we naturally will have to partner with them hard stop. I think there's probably also going to be some sort of expectation for us to bring certain resources to the table during the construction of those projects. If there is a dedicated transit lane, it's probably reasonable for whoever owns that roadway to expect the ride to contribute for that portion of the project. And I think that's a lot of, the opportunities that we're looking for. I think the other thing too is to really start coalescing around what that vision is and really trying to develop a narrative so that the public understands the value of this infrastructure. So then that way leaders in the community, elected officials and others can help be supporters and proponents. That again, it's not just riders of our buses that will benefit. This achieves so many of the community's goals, accessibility, equity, sustainability. All of these things are really aligned, and the RIDE is a key partner in achieving those outcomes for policies that have been adopted by the city, the state, and others. So I think, really trying to build that up and try to educate so that people understand what the shared vision is and understand what those mutual benefits are.
And if it's all right, Jesse, if I might add on to what Raymond said. I think we're taking a multi-prong approach in terms of trying to, at one hand, coordinate all these things in the benefit of our, to bring our long-range plan forward, but also to advocate a bit more forcefully than we've done in the past. And I'll make three points. Forrest's group is leading the work, and Raymond basically described it, of coordinating staff to staff between our institution and the city, our institution and MDOT, in aligning these big capital investment strategies, which often take years. Sometimes all of a sudden something breaks forward, and the university and the city decide, State Street's a bus lane next year. Okay, we're happy to go along for the ride. We may not be in the driver's seat, but we're happy it's getting done. We're going to get there. We don't care exactly how. And so there's a lot of work going on, staff to staff in that space. Jeff, and we talked about sort of meetings with elected officials that are going to be picking up. There's that political element of coordination and relationship building and education that we intend to start doing a whole lot more of, and stay tuned for that. And then something Raymond hasn't mentioned directly is, but I'm sure we'll get there at some point, if not tonight. At some point, we will need to tie a lot of these things together into one cohesive project, particularly Washtenaw, particularly for bus rapid transit. And this is kind of Raymond's next big RFP and next big project is a full study of bus rapid transit on the entirety of the Washtenaw Avenue corridor. It's our number one BRT corridor. And things like the Ypsilanti area Pell. Okay, maybe it's a little earlier, but we'll take it. It gets, half the corridor. There's now state DOT basically saying, yeah, this works for us. We can begin to bring that into a study perhaps that we lead. And we're having conversations with MDOT about how do we take this next step and what does that look like? Because that corridor, if we go for federal funding, and it may be after 2028 when we do that, that's going to have to be sort of downtown to downtown. We can't piecemeal that in a big grant proposal. It's going to have to be a certain degree of unified leadership, and we're the agency that's going to be doing it. That said, the RTA is going to be a big partner, and we have sort of a hot potatoed this project back and forth between the two agencies over the years. So there's those three things I would add to what Raymond said in terms of pursuing this in multiple directions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think what's kind of driving my my question was wondering, like, I guess particularly with the State Street project, was this something that the city of Ann Arbor brought to us and we went and checked our LRP really quick and said, oh, good, this matches the LRP? Or was it something, I think ideally I would like that, that this came together as a cooperative effort, that it was recognized from the get-go that there are multiple stakeholders who were involved from the beginning, so that coordination is happening throughout the project rather than trying to be remediated. And not just for this project seems fine, but just thinking going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously this project was in concept before I was here at TheRide, and so I saw it through the other lens. I would say that transit was always talked about as part of this project from its inception, just because of, like I said before, an acknowledgement by city staff about the importance of transit on this corridor. And I think in a way that's very reassuring. I mean, what I see through a lot of these efforts is we have very willing partners in the city, the university, and MDOT, and we need to capitalize on that. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to show support for these projects. We're trying to be involved. We're trying to, give technical expertise when and where we can. And then, if there are other resources we can bring to the table as well, I think that's all part of that discussion. So yes, I think on the State Street project in particular, there was a lot of discussions with TheRide and the AAATA long before what we shared publicly. I think the other entities were kind of driving it based on some other factors and sensitivities to impacts to businesses and things like that. So, the concept that, is brought before you is, the 10th version of a concept, right? There were 9 versions that preceded it. But this is the one that has kind of won the day and kind of checks all the boxes. So that's where we are.
Any other questions or comments? Mike?
Yeah, thanks very much, Raymond. This was a great presentation. And it's really, the illustrations in here are terrific in terms of being able to understand what's really, maybe it will be looking like when these are implemented. And also, it's very reassuring to see that these are really, these are things that are starting, that are moving us forward in our long-range plan. I mean, that's really nice. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges. Money, of course, is always a challenge, finding the funding here. Another challenge that I don't think I'm hearing a lot about, that's to me a big one too, is the acceptance of certain things to the elected officials and to the citizens. And I'm specifically thinking about the fact that these kinds of projects, even though they are terrific for the environment, they're terrific for sustainability. Ann Arbor is really, in the area, is very pro-environment, pro-sustainability. And I have a lot of friends who are considered to be even environmental champions. But I'm hearing a lot of grumbling about, you're taking away my car lanes, you're taking away our parking spaces and things like that. Even though they are really good overall, and I sure support it, but a lot of people, even though they are supposedly environmentalists, they don't want to have their parking taken away. They don't want to have their car lanes taken away by things having to do with public transportation. What kind of plans are there to really sell these things to the people and to the elected officials? Because
Wait, give
that's
me a real
really important.
softball
I'm sure you and everybody else realizes that. But what kind of plans are going forward to try to meet that challenge?
Yeah, stay tuned, right? I mean, change is hard. We are dealing in a built environment where, the addition of something often comes at the subtraction of something else, right? We can't, add these bus lanes out of nowhere and just have them not impact anything. So we have to be very kind of cognizant and thoughtful about those trade-offs. There are going to be areas where we probably won't get, everything we would like to have to maximize efficiency of transit operations because of some of those trade-offs. I've struggled with the very point you've made for 6 years in trying to really talk about, how do we achieve, I was working on a slogan that never caught on, but I'll test it all with you. Change demands a catalyst. So if we're going to effectuate change, if we're going to achieve our environmental, our equity, something has to change. We can't expect it to change without changing anything else. And so to me, in this capacity, bus lanes represent that change. We can effectuate our goals of accessibility, equity, sustainability, so forth, and safety through the addition of bus lanes. Because, if you look at the research, if you look at what other communities have done, they have realized those outcomes. And so it is possible in this community, but we have to have a sort of acceptance of some of those trade-offs. And I think it's going to be difficult. I'm sure we're going to be involved in some conversations where, there will be opposition to some of these concepts. I think having a supportive board is always helpful. So we, appreciate all the leadership you've exhibited through, the 2045 plan and so forth and so on. I think a lot of that helps. And then, we'll be working with, the executive team too, to really figure out which stakeholders we need to bring on board, what those messaging topics are, and how to advance the conversation forward. It's a lot of words without saying anything, but I don't have I don't have the magic formula, unfortunately.
I sure wish you all the success in that. Just the bike lanes, I hear a lot of complaints about for those reasons. I mean, that's pretty minor compared with some bigger thoughts that we're talking about here. And I just hope that there is a unified effort to really address that.
Simi?
Yeah, thank you, Raymond. And since bike lanes came up, it's just something I had thought about. The bike lanes occasionally get parked in by commercial vehicles. Same thing on roadways generally. Wondering how that sort of works out when you've got dedicated bus lanes and then enforcement when we're talking about some of these being in Ann Arbor, some in Ypsilanti. Wonder what that looks like.
Yeah, great question. That is actually one of the issues we flagged on the State Street project in particular. We know that that's a high demand corridor. We know it will be awfully tempting for someone to pick up, drop off, and just kind of stand in that area. And then the whole effectiveness of that bus lane breaks down, right? You no longer, it might actually be worse, right? Because now a bus is stuck behind a parked car when the rest of the travel lane is moving. So we have asked the city to investigate what are the ways we can protect the integrity of that bus lane, whether that means vertical delineators or some other sort of treatment. We flagged that we don't think paint alone will achieve the outcome. It's a good first step, but to your point, bike lanes, paint alone hasn't achieved the outcome. So it's an ongoing discussion. I will also admit that some of this will probably be iterative. We'll put something out, we'll see what's working, probably have to tweak it, come back with some alternative solutions. So we'll just have to be nimble. That's actually the beauty of bus lanes too, is because it's largely paint and because it is fairly flexible, we can make some of those adjustments. And so, stay tuned on this issue as well. But it is something, of importance to us that if we're going to have this dedicated infrastructure for transit, let's make sure it's operating and functioning the way it was intended.
Yes, Julie.
I just want to respond to Mike's comment. I mean, part of it is just like a comfort level with accepting that you can't make everyone happy. Like you articulate the trade-offs, you articulate the value, you do it. Most people 2 years later won't remember that it wasn't that way forever. And then some people are like still mad they can't eat at Drake's and like you just, like you just sorry. So it's that kind of approach, I think, that you have to take because it's a value that the community supported. It was in the plan, right? That the public approved in the millage. Now, did all of them read it that carefully? No, but like they still approved it and it's there. And it was not something that was hidden. In fact, it was really highlighted, right? So a majority of the public, a significant majority of the public approved this. But you're always going to have people who like value their own desire to get somewhere as quickly from A to B to C. And, they should learn that like after living here for so long that like the hospital changes over at 4:00, right? So, but they're still gonna complain anyway. And I think there's just that, I don't know how else to explain, but like the comfort with the conflict and with that, like just the idea that you can't make everyone happy and it's okay.
Matt, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I'll just offer a few things. One thing is, this is kind of a societal change. We've been an auto-oriented society, an increasingly auto-oriented society for decades, for generations. Switching back from that, that's not going to be an overnight sort of thing. We're doing a lot of things on multiple fronts to, I don't say sell the product, but make the alternative of using public transit as opposed to your car as easy and as attractive as we can. Jeff's group's working on a marketing plan. The fleet group are bringing in new buses. There's a lot of, we're going to work on fare payment and how we do all these things. That's a cultural change. That's a societal shift, and that's not easy. But yeah, stay tuned. There's more to come. I'll also say that the first bus lane is the hardest one, probably like the bike lanes were. But because it's new, because it's change. But once it becomes a little more normal, it's not as threatening. But the first one's the tough one. And I like all these projects because, relatively speaking, if you were going to put a bus lane in, these are probably the easier wins. That section of Washtenaw and Ypsilanti is, I won't say overbuilt, but the road is doesn't have enough traffic on it to consume all the lanes that are there, curb to curb. So taking two of them away for buses isn't going to actually necessarily make traffic all that worse. There's one intersection, is it Hewitt or Gulfside, that's got Gulfside, that one's going to have some issues, but other than that, it's not so bad. On State Street, yeah, the curb parking, that's, there you, okay, getting closer to the third rail, to use a transit analogy, curb parking is a real issue. But there's only, notwithstanding the merchants up on North State Street who do use that area, it's kind of one big institutional user of that space, and they're the big ones pushing this project. They want this. It's the city's road. The city's in for this. So the kinds of bus lane projects that make me kind of go, okay, are where you're going through a dense area with small shops where curb parking is the only thing you got. Think like Liberty. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing where you take that curb parking out for a bike lane or a bus lane, you're going to hear from every store owner, and they're going to be not happy. So to make the first one successful, both of these projects in my mind are easier hurdles to get over than they could be if we had picked some other segments. So these are good places to start. And get it in there, have it be successful, like the State Street. I think we counted up the number of bus movements between us and the university. It's like hundreds a day, maybe even 1,000 of individual buses, let alone the people on the buses. So the throughput of that street I think both of them can be very successful without incurring a whole lot of public blowback. And finally, I'll add, I remember being at the Washtenaw Pell study. There were a large number of the public who in favor of the bus lanes. So it's not just us as an institution already. There's a lot of people out there in the community that support the idea too. Mike's not wrong. Like we sense that same kind of pushback in some cases, but we shouldn't undersell it either.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments? I think we are done. Raymond, thank you for that, and go get some rest. Next on the agenda is our quarterly 4 financial report, and that's Ms. Dina Reed.
Thank you. Fourth quarter financial statement report is in your packet. It is noted as preliminary. The report itself is not going to change. It's not preliminary, but the numbers within it are preliminary. This is as of our fourth quarter close. As you know, it's the end of our fiscal year, so there will be post-period adjustments that are made before we issue financial statements. So that's why it's delineated as preliminary. This report has been reviewed at the Finance Committee in a lot of detail, as usual. And what I'll walk you through today is the highlights and how we're looking at the end of the year. So starting on page 119 of your packet is the income statement. And I just want to point out how we're doing compared to, or how we've done this year compared to budget. We've ended the year pretty much on budget, 3% variance to budget. I'm going to start with expenses and just kind of highlight a couple of two main areas where we were under budget, which basically ended with the favorable variance. So we were under in salaries, wages, and benefits, and we were under in fuel, materials, and supplies. And those really weren't that we gave up anything. It was just a matter of maybe budgeting a little more conservatively than what the actuals came in at, which is typical. As you know, we can't exceed the operating expenses budget for the year, so we budget a little more conservatively. So we budget 100% for all of our positions. And then throughout the year, there's turnover, there are vacancies, there are things that creep in. And this year was especially difficult. I'm actually proud of how we ended on budget. It was especially difficult with the expansion of services phasing in throughout the year. You might have remembered during the budget cycle that graph that kind of showed the progression over time kind of going up in different phases as we were expanding both in the spring and then in the fall. And this really represents that we did it, we performed very well compared to that budget. So I'm very proud of staff and the effort that it took to come in within budget this year. The other good news is that we were able to finish out the year without using any federal operating assistance or the federal operating assistance that would come from formula funding. We had originally budgeted that, and you're seeing what looks like an unfavorable, so when it's revenue that comes in short, it's called unfavorable. But really, for us, that's favorable, because that means that money is still available for capital use. So that money didn't go anywhere, it's still there, but it's available for capital. The other thing that's interesting about the year-end statement here is that we're showing a balanced budget at the end of the year. And as you know, revenues almost never exactly match expenses. So I just want to point out that local property taxes is essentially a plug that represents the amount of property taxes we had to use to balance the budget this year. And it actually ended the year under what we budgeted. So we didn't have to use as much of our property tax revenues for operations or to match the operating budget. I also want to point out that there's an asterisk next to local property taxes, because we actually received more property taxes within the fiscal year, but those property taxes were reserved or will be used for next fiscal year. It's the new millage. So we wanted to note it here because you're going to see on the flip side, we're going to talk about our balance sheet and the assets going up, and I didn't want to lose that continuity. But I also wanted to show accurate performance to budget, which is what this income statement shows. So when we see financial statements in a couple months, you'll see the full impact of the revenue that we received recorded there. So we're in compliance with GASB or General Accounting standards. So I just wanted to point out here, there's a footnote telling you that we did receive an additional $19 million. We're just not reflecting it here because it wasn't used for this fiscal year in terms of what we needed for expense. Midway through the page, the other thing I want to note, and you can kind of see the difference in pandemic relief funds. We've been talking about this, and I think this might be the last time we're going to talk about it for a while. We've used all the pandemic relief funds, so there's none left, which is good. Flipping over to the next page, page 120, just want to highlight a couple of things on this page. You can see in the balance sheet that our assets have risen dramatically, and that's a result of the additional cash we're holding for operations. We've already started spending that money. We are fully funded, like we talked about earlier, for the expansion of services, and that money is going to be needed for this fiscal year, so we're already working into that. But over at the end of the year, we ended in a very favorable position for assets. Also want to show, demonstrated on this page under the reserve section, all of our reserves are funded. Still, we haven't removed anything from any of the capital reserves or anything else that would require board approval, just noting that all of the reserves are noted, the reserve balances are noted here. The one thing you might notice in the graph just to the right of where we show the assets in the top section, it looks like our operating balance reserve drops below our target. That was an intentional approach because we've talked about this a little bit during the budget, but we are proposing to lower our reserve target to 2.0 instead of 2.5. But that decision has not been fully vetted at the Finance Committee. We'll be vetting that next month at the Finance Committee. If for some reason the ultimate determination is that we won't lower the reserve target, we will fund the reserve up to the amount of the reserve target requirement before the end of next quarter. So that would come out of the fund balance that's shown here with all of our assets. So we do have the money to fund that reserve more fully, but we think it's actually more prudent not to do that. We're going to have that discussion at the Finance Committee and bring back the determination next quarter. But that's why it looks a little bit different than usual. Cash position throughout the quarters and compared to prior quarters is strong. Just demonstrated here at the beginning of the page, or the middle of the page, and then down lower to the end, you can see our investment summary it's pretty much stable. So basically what happened in the fourth quarter was any investment that came, that matured, we rolled it into a new investment at a much higher interest rate. So we're still earning more interest than we have been in the past on these investments. So that concludes the highlights of the fourth quarter report. As board chair recognized, we're in the middle of starting our financial audit for the year. So the financial statements reflecting this information will be coming probably in February. So just wanted to tie that in, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
we have any questions from the board? Seeing none, thank you, Dina.
You're welcome.
Next on our agenda is the CEO report. Matt?
Thank you. I have a couple things I'll highlight in the written report and one or two things to add. At the bottom of page 121, my goodness, okay, we're playing catch up for October with such a big package, my apologies. Under the Ypsilanti Transit Center, I do believe we sort of completed the archaeological digging, no significant findings there. That's a good sign. You don't want to find anything too old under there. It might give the project a speed bump. On the next page, 122, it's kind of buried down towards the bottom, bus facilities and garage. You may have remember we've said the garage is full. We can't expand the fleet without having a place to put the buses because of our climate. That means we can't expand service again. So a big future thing for us is going to be garage work. And I was very happy to see the planning department get an RFP, request for proposal, out to begin that study. That's going to be it's an important milestone to get started. That's going to be a very important capital project, and it's going to take a lot of thought. And it's not going to be a cheap solution either, but it's definitely time we start thinking about it. So my kudos to the planning department for getting it started. The next page on stopgap bus replacement. This is sort of with Nova Bus pulling out of the U.S. market. We had to pivot that contract back to Gillig, our traditional bus supplier. This one's been here for a while, but I'm happy to report this week that the first of these new buses arrived. Drove all the way from California to get delivered. That shakedown drive is important because if anything's going to fall off, it usually happens there. You'd be surprised. And I got here with no problems. It's a good looking bus. I look forward to showing it to you. It's an interesting aesthetic and functional merger of the old Gilligs and the new Novas. It looks a little like both. So I look forward to bringing it along, maybe to a future board meeting. Could actually go down and have a look at it. And there's some new features on there as well. A lot of good stuff for employees. Congratulations to Jerry Page, retired after 40 years. I think his last day was yesterday or the day before. Great guy, we sorely missed. Definitely part of the generational turnover. A lot of positive things towards the bottom of the page in terms of relatively small grants, only $200,000 to win there to help with the Blake Transit Center, but also an award that Lillian was able to go to North Carolina and receive from Transportation Demand Management Association. A really nice thing, beautiful little glass statuette. And I think I'll stop there, but those are just some of the new things that have been running through on the operational level. Happy to answer any questions about those or anything else in the report.
Thank you, Matt. Susan? And then Mike.
I can't ask my question without saying congratulations on the Get Downtown program. It's just, I'm so proud that this, I mean, it's one thing to have a good idea, but to continue something and have it run so well, kudos to the staff. My question is, it's not included in your report. I don't know if you could speak to it or not, which is a program that I absolutely love, and I'm sad that it's finding its way out of our budget, which is the D2A2 service to Detroit. We talked earlier about changes at the state and what may or may not be coming. Have you heard from RTA what the longevity of that program is likely to be? I know it was funded with a state grant, and again, changes in politics you can't predict, but is it slated to run through all of 2025? Do we know? What can you say about it? It's one of those incredible things that I think keeps building, and kudos to us for having been a part of the launch. I just don't want to see it go away. So what do you know about it?
Funding is secured through 2030. So it's good news. It's not going anywhere. You're stuck with it. For our downtown Detroit travelers and reverse, we're very happy about that. The Detroit to Ann Arbor D2A2 service was started as a partnership between us and the RTA. It was always envisioned as TheRide would incubate it. The RTA would pay for it. We really did everything else, except maybe the marketing. They did the marketing. Fully from day one with the idea that we would eventually hand it over to them. They are the regional transit authority, and particularly inter-county service was always seen as their bailiwick, if you will. But they didn't have staff. They didn't have a procurement department. They didn't have anyone to oversee operations, to make NTD reports. It was very skeletal. So they could cut a check, but that was about it, and they relied on everything else for us. The funding was always touch and go. Your memory is good. It did rely initially on one-time state money, and then a little more one-time state money, and then I think they had a CMAQ grant that was going to expire this year, actually next month. But you may recall some time ago, the RTA hived off a little bit of the last COVID relief, federal relief grant from us and the Metro Detroit area. There was a little kerfuffle there because they maybe didn't communicate their intentions in that space very well to us. Our former chairman was more than a little bit upset about that. They had aspirations at that time to find other projects to spend it on. They never really could get that thought off the launch pad. And we began to suggest to them some time ago, a year ago, it would be a good use of that money that has to be spent in this urban area, that you take that money and a similar amount of money from the Detroit metro area and use it to keep your flagship service running. And partially because it's a brilliant idea, partially because they didn't have a better idea. That's what they ended up doing with that money. So that's where it is stable through 2030. Very excited about it. It's a good use of the funding. It helps them, sort of maintain one of their biggest successes to date. They also have a Detroit to DTW service now, which is great for them. But this I still think is a really important one. So it's come a long way. We have completed sort of the administrative handoff. I want to be clear about it, though. The only thing that's really changed is in the administration of who holds the contract with the contracting bus operator. That's Indian Trails, the same company that does Michigan Flyer, the TheRide service, same group. They've always been the contractor. We just basically transferred the contract from us to the RTA, so it's moved from our procurement department to theirs. The federal reporting has followed it. Other than, and customers won't notice any change at all whatsoever. The fares are the same, the marketing's the same, the personnel is the same, information is the same. So that service continues to be a success. Last time I saw it had almost 10,000 trips a month, so it's doing very well. And we're happy to see it leave the nest and grow into what it will become.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Carpenter? Mike.
Yes, Matt, I have a question. It involves the section that you have in there as legislative update. And a lot of the information in there really was covered by you and Jeff earlier. But I think I have a problem with the very last sentence in that section. All the incumbent state representatives who ran won their election. I don't believe that's true, if it applies to the entire state.
No.
Because it,
I meant for our service area.
okay, it wasn't qualified. I thought it must have been the county or the service area or something like that. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, an emergent item with regards to the Ypsilanti board meeting dates. So we were willy-nilly making last-minute decisions to go to Ypsilanti and have board meetings. And at the last governance committee meeting, we discussed trying to be more proactive and assigning predetermined dates in a hopes that by having predetermined dates, we can garner more interest out in that community to want to maybe come to a board meeting by giving them a heads up, but also to help us with our planning as well. We agreed to 2 meetings at a minimum, but we did suss out 3 meetings, and we are coming to you all to wonder if that is something that the board would like to have predetermined dates. Staff have already, Deb has already looked into next year. We identified January, May, and July. And so although there is going to be some sort of public engagement period for the YTC, so that's why we were thinking May. Art Fair here is in July, and then January just to get a third one on the books. So I'd like to open it for discussion if you have any thoughts about going out to Ypsilanti on a predetermined date. And also, Matt noted in his issue brief here that this decision might set a precedent for future years in terms of, but I don't know what that would look like. Would it look like we would continue to use the same exact months in future years? Would we have the same amount of meetings in future years? I'm not sure how that would parse out, but I think it's a really good idea for us to continue going out to our sister communities and having board meetings. So are there any thoughts from the board? Yes, Julie.
I know we also talked about still trying to find maybe one meeting in Ypsi Township, and I know that's been a challenge. Like if I could pick an ideal scenario, it would be like 2 in Ypsi and then 1 in the township, but I know that's, so that would be the only thing in terms of precedent, that if in the future we could identify a place in Ypsi Township, that would be my preference to switch one of those there.
No, I think that's an excellent point, and I do believe by having ownership linkage and having Matt and Jeff going out in terms of operational and organizational things, we do have a meeting that will be coming up with the township. That could certainly be something that could be discussed. I know that the township is a little bit harder to identify in terms of places to meet that are maybe near bus lines and easy for people to get to. So that is also going to be a consideration. I think that's the reason why we chose the Riverside Art Center. For many reasons, it just fell into being a good position. But the number one reason in my mind why it is such a brilliant area to meet is it's literally 1 block from the Ypsilanti Transit Center. So anybody who wants to come in from the township would still be able to do that and not have to come all the way into Ann Arbor. But no, that's an excellent suggestion. Would you suggest then, Julie, is it your wish that maybe we should only pick 2 dates for Ypsilanti and hold back on the 3rd until we talk to the township? Or would we like to plan for 2025? There's only, what?
I mean, January is right around the corner,
Yeah.
so I don't have strong feelings about it one way or the
Okay.
other. I really like the idea of the May and July for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm kind of agnostic on the January.
Okay. Yes, Mike?
First, let me say that I'm very supportive that we set in advance and basically have a policy on doing this, rather than just kind of, oh, let's do it this month and each year, and maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3. I certainly like the idea of having a kind of a target anyway. Probably it won't work out in every case. And I also like the idea, if we can, if it works, to be able to have a meeting in Ypsi Township. I'll tell people who are not on the governance committee, I was in the minority, I think, when I really supported 2 rather than 3 meetings in Ypsilanti. Not because I'm against Ypsilanti or anything like that, but I mean, clearly this library is a better place to meet physically. There are better facilities, better audio visual, better parking. And to me, it just seems like 2 is a better number than 3. But I'm certainly not going to scream if we have a different decision.
Fair enough. Any other thoughts about proposing to meet out on designated months? we could certainly vote on it this evening, especially since January is right around the corner. Does anybody like to make a motion in terms of what your thoughts are on all three or only two? And then we'll see if that carries and then go from there.
I would maybe make a suggestion or a modification to that. We just vote on these 3 dates to be either in, well, primarily in City Ypsi, and if it turns out that one of them, after the meetings with the township, we can have one of them be in Ypsi Township, and then Deb can actually find a location, then we just substitute one of them in.
I'd be open to that. Would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Yeah.
Oh, go
sure.
ahead, Julie, were you?
Oh, I think Rich just did.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll second it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you say the motion again so everybody's clear on it?
Sure. We'll accept all 3 of these locations as a City of Ypsi location, and then if it turns out that we can do an Ypsi Township, then we'll substitute one of them, either May or July.
So motion by Rich, seconded by Julie. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. So we're going to close out the meeting by having an action item recap, and that's going to take place with Deb instead of Matt. Yay, Deb.
We're transitioning this one. Deb, are you ready? A little earlier than I expected.
Sure. I have the.
apologize, was that, she had told me, okay.
I didn't see Matt scribbling anything down, so. The service committee is going to be reviewing 2.1.3 and also 2.12 and 2.131. So that'll be at the next meeting that they have. There will be an update to the policy manual as we deleted 2.72. A few questions came from the discussion. Dina is going to look a little bit more into the amounts we receive from the gas tax. Mike had asked that. You'll probably just email? Okay. And then Jeff was going to get more information, as Susan had requested, on the Washtenaw County Prop 3, the older person service millage. And that was all that I had.
Okay, topics for next meeting will, the LAC, according to our policy, we've asked the LAC to come to us with their thoughts on our ends policy, but also treatment of the traveling public. So we will be hearing from them in December, so plan on hearing from them. I'm not sure if they're going to be in person or on Zoom. We're also going to receive the quarterly forest service report. We're going to be receiving the ends monitoring report early. How awesome is that? Congratulations, you guys. Thank you so much. And then in the future, we will talk about training and reasonableness. And with that, we'll move right into public comment. Deb, is anyone online indicating that they'd like to speak with us? There is no public comment, so we'll close that out and we will entertain a motion for adjournment. Motion by Rich, seconded by Simi. I don't think we need to have a discussion. All those in favor say yay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night and happy holidays.